This is the now legendary Salmo SLIDER. It was originally introduced in 2002 and quickly became a must-have lure throughout all of Europe for pike fishing, and has become one of the most often copied lures on the market today. The Salmo SLIDER is a member of the glider family of lures. Sliders are available in 5 sizes, ranging from 2 inches all the way up to 4.5 inches in total body length, with lure weights ranging from only 1/4 ounce all the way up to 2.5 ounces. The Salmo sliders are available in both floating and sinking models, and they come in a wide selection of colors to match any fishing situation. With all Salmo lures, including the slider, it is best to match your tackle requirements to the size lure you are using. It is critical to match the right rod, reel, and line to the lure size you are using, not only for ease of use, but to also prevent undue stress on your equipment. When fishing the smaller sliders, you can use standard spinning tackle or light bait casting gear, but we do recommend rods in the 6-foot lengths with fast action. You need a rod with a fast action to give the proper snapping action to the slider, and 20-pound test line is best. For the larger sliders, bait casting tackle is the best choice. Rods in the 6 to 8 foot range that are designed specifically for handling heavy lures are a must. High-speed, level-wind bait casting reels with a 6-to-1 ratio and at least 50-pound braided line is a great combination. With the larger lures, you have larger hooks, so a more powerful rod is needed to give you a good hook set. We highly recommend that you use at least a 12-inch leader when fishing with the Salmo slider. To more effectively fish your slider, you have to think about what your goal is, and your goal will be to imitate a weak or injured fish that cannot swim in a straight direction. The Salmo slider gives you that flexibility. It is this imitation of an injured baitfish that will trigger you more strikes. The best way to create the classic gliding action of a slider is easy. It starts with a downward pull of your rod. As you raise your rod, you'll take up your slack with your reel and then pull downward again. The speed and length of the downward pull should be constantly changed up until you find an action that will trigger a strike. The key to converting more strikes into landed fish is to always remember to take up your slack after each pull of the rod. High-speed gears in reels make this task a lot easier. When you have slack on your line, you may miss the opportunity to get a good hook set. Line control is very important when fishing a slider. While the gliding action of the slider is a classic technique, there are a few other methods to try. The simple retrieve method requires no special skills. Simply cast out your slider, and with your rod tip pointed at the lure, you simply reel in the lure without moving the rod in any way, and the slider will flash from side to side and wobble like a spoon. But you can fish it much slower than a spoon, and for this reason, it is a deadly method for cold water pike. Another method is the long stroke technique. As the name implies, you make a much longer stroke of your rod. The longer stroke gives the action of your slider a much longer glide, and with each new stroke, the lure heads off in a slightly different direction and then stops again. The key here is your ability to take up the slack between the strokes, because the fish will love to hit the slider just as you stop the lure, so be ready. The third technique involves using a sinking slider and is called the drop-off method. Unique to the sinking slider is the wobble and flash of the lure as it slowly sinks to the bottom. This wobble and flash is a key to triggering those fish holding in deeper waters. Now you can fish the lure any way you want coming back to the boat, but it is key that you keep the line tight as it drops to the bottom to give you that wobble and flash. Now, the versatility of the slider makes for the final technique called the change-up method. This is simply a blending of all the techniques we've shown you to simply blend them together to find what the fish want. This slider is one of the most versatile lures on the water today, and for this reason, you can and must use it to its fullest potential. And that means having fun making the slider find a fish-catching action that will work for you. The Salmo slider is available in both sinking and floating models. You can fish the floating sliders above thick weeds or only in a foot of water if you wish, and run the lure just below the surface. It's deadly when you fish it around lily pads, where you can let the floating slider sit in a key spot to give fish time to find it and attack. The floaters are fun to fish because you can actually see the action of the lure while you're fishing. This allows you to teach yourself the different lure actions that will trigger a strike. Now, sinking sliders have very much the same action as the floating slider, except they sink when they're not being moved. Now, this sinking ability allows you to get the lure directly in front of the fish, holding in deeper waters. Floating sliders are effective in waters down to 10 feet deep. Now, don't get us wrong here. The lure does not actually run to 10 feet, but the fish calling power of the slider can easily call up a fish from deeper waters. The rule is simple. The clearer the waters, the more effective a floating slider can be over those deep waters. Now, when you cast out your floating sliders, try to keep your rod tip high as you start, and then swing your rod tip down. And with a steady movement, the lure will track about 2 feet below the surface, and if you stop or pause the lure for more than a second, the lure will rise back up to the surface. Faster strokes tend to keep the lure running at a constant level. It is common to switch up your rod tip motions to find an action that triggers a fish to strike. And don't be surprised if the fish attacks while the lure is not moving at all. So when fishing a slider, you must be ready for that strike at any moment. The sinking version of the slider allows you to fish much deeper waters and with greater ease and with a variety of different speeds. The key thing to remember when fishing a sinking slider is that the lure stays at the depth you start moving the lure back to the boat at. As long as the lure is moving at a fairly nice pace, it will stay at that depth. If you stop or slow the lure down to a series of slow pulls, the bait will keep sinking deeper and deeper. When fishing a steep drop-off where you do want the lure to follow the contour of the bottom, it is common to stop several times with your rod tip pointed downward and allow the bait to seek a new depth and then begin your retrieve once again. Be prepared. When you're fishing with a slider, you always want to keep your rod tip pointed downward, since most of the strikes occur as the lure stops moving forward, and you need to have that rod in a good position for a hook set. In summary, remember, when you make a cast, you can pause a little or a lot after the lure hits the water to allow the lure to sink before you start working it back to the boat. If you're fishing a steep drop-off and wish the lure to follow the contour of the bottom, then you simply need to stop your lure as many times as necessary on its way back to the boat and allow the slider to sink deeper and then continue your retrieve. And here's one final tip. It's great fun to learn how a slider works while fishing in a very clear lake, where you can actually see and understand just how amazing the action of a Salmo slider can be. There's no water where a fish can hide from the Salmo slider, shallow or deep, in weeds or rocks. The Salmo slider has set the world standard in glide bait technology.